I thought we were going to have like a quiet. I think we were both just saying we are going to have a quiet show to kind of end the first 21 episodes and have a little summer break or whatever. It's the best race I've watched in like 4 years, I think.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like we've had a few races this year where it's been crazy at one point and then there's been a bit of a lull. There was like action in the first lap, a bit of action later on, some tussles with some back markers, action up the front, action down the middle.
I think we had what this season has delivered is a lot of moments that like have never happened and you almost could never recalled. And you had that in the first half. The first half of this race was mental. But in the second half, you just had brilliant racing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what I hope next season is going to be like, because it was absolutely epic.
Yeah, there's been a few like flashes of really nice close racing, but to even see Mick Schumacher getting in on the close racing at points, it was the kind of thing dreams are made of.
It was just fantastic. I mean, let's just start talking about it because there's so much to unpack.
Yeah, so going into the race day, it was all dry and calm, and the drivers made their way from the pits to the grid, and then it started raining, and that's when everyone knew that we were on for a blinder, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Because usually, if it's going to rain, it's like rained for quite a bit before, so drivers have seen how wet the track is. But I think because the first taste of the rain that they got was the parade lap, they kind of hadn't had a chance to really figure out where braking points were, what was going to happen, how much grip they'd have.
No, and it's quite an undulating circuit, so kind of the flow of the water can change, I guess. But also, it's so hot in Hungary this time of year that it's just completely unpredictable. On like if the sun is shining over in the other side of the circuit, it could be completely different conditions to what you've got on the grid.
Yeah, and so the cars went out on a parade lap, and at this point, I thought it was a bit bold that Giovinazzi came in, switched to slicks. Everyone else lined up on the grid. Lights out, away we go. And it basically all went wrong for Bottas from that point on, didn't it? So he had a very slow start off the line. He lost places to Max Verstappen, who qualified third, Sergio Perez, who was in fourth, and Lando Norris, who was sixth. They basically all made it past him. But then as he was going into the first corner, I don't know if he locked up or missed his braking point. He slammed into the back of Lando Norris, who then crashed into the side of Max Verstappen, while Bottas spun into the side of Sergio Perez. And while all that was going on, Lance Stroll locked his tyres, tried to avoid Esteban Ocon, hit Charles Leclerc, who then hit Daniel Ricciardo, while Lewis Hamilton was already up on like turn 7.
And Giovinazzi joins the pack 5 minutes later, like, what's going on, guys?
Were you expecting anything as mad as that?
No. I was expecting a bit of carnage. I mean, the last, we had a wet race at Imola, but the last time we had some opening lap drama was Turkey last year, where I think Bottas again tangled with Ricciardo at turn 1. But this was just a different level. I don't know what happened.
I don't really remember seeing a first lap collision that impacted so many drivers' race.
And so many of the top drivers.
Yeah. Yeah, because so after the crash, initially we lost Bottas, Perez, Stroll and Leclerc. They were all out. Then the race got red flagged. The cars all came into the pits. And after kind of an evaluation of Lando's car, he retired as well. And he's the one that's already got his reputation for sweeping up podiums.
Yep.
So then you were like, well, who's going to go out on top now? Because at this
And
point,
then
you've got Lewis in the lead, and I think Ocon was second by this point, wasn't he?
yes, because what seemed to happen was every driver that got a bad start didn't get involved. So Vettel also got a terrible start and was able to just slow down because he had so much more braking time. And then they just kind of drove past everyone,
Yeah.
and they were very lucky. All the cars that got decent starts, like Lando and Perez, actually, Leclerc as well got past Stroll, I think, pretty quickly. They ended up paying the price for it, which was a
Yeah.
real shame.
Yeah, like you mentioned the onboards there. I think it is Ocon's, where you sort of see him coming to the corner. No, you see him coming up to the corner, the front runners all get taken out, and then he starts going around the corner, and then suddenly Leclerc's in front of him, and he has to
Yeah,
kind of turn out the way, and then the only car ahead of him is Hamilton, and that's him in second, where he stayed for only like a lap, I think.
yeah. The one of one of the saddest onboards I think I've ever seen is Daniel Ricciardo's, because he gets a decent start, he's staying out of trouble, and he literally says he said this in his kind of post race analysis with McLaren. He sees the track kind of open up, and he's like, "I'm in second,"
Yeah,
and then he just gets clipped from behind and spun round, and he was so frustrated.
yeah,
I don't know if you saw him in Parc Ferme getting out of the car. He just like had to hang his head, because these are the races that, like, if that first crash happened, you'd put your money on like Ricciardo, Leclerc to be picking up the points in that situation.
yeah, yeah. And I don't think when you initially watch the crash, you kind of appreciate how much damage Ricardo would have sustained, but kind of the way Leclerc hit him was quite similar to how Norris hit Verstappen. It was like right into the side,
Yeah,
hit a bit of the engine cover, hit the floor. So he'd have lost all of his kind of aerodynamic devices down the right hand side as well. Maybe not to the same extent as Max, but he's in a slower car than Max. So it was pretty heartbreaking to just see him kind of have this golden opportunity snatched away by a careering Ferrari.
yeah. I think I was more upset about Ricciardo losing so much pace than I was about like Lando being knocked out. It's a shame for Lando, but he's been like on such good form. This was something that Ricciardo could have really done with for his
Yeah,
McLaren career.
yeah,
But then the whole Bottas thing, I just find it hilarious. Like the whole thing is just so fun. It had to be Bottas. He had
yeah,
to take out the two Red Bulls. It had to be his fault. Like, it's a classic crash.
yeah. And it was how the crash evolved, because it started and you're like, oh no, he's hit Lando, and then it was, oh no, Lando's hit Max. Oh no, Bottas has hit Perez. There were sort of like shocking elements as it went on, and because like the race starts at like 9 a.m. over here, so my partner was still asleep, and I'd got up to start watching it, and I was like, ah, ah, ah!
It's literally,
Came running out like, what's happened?
literally. I had lunch with my mum and stepdad, and I put the race on, and they were washing up. I literally went, "Oh no, oh no, oh no!" And like my stepdad came rushing in and like saw what had happened and just the carnage that had happened, because they don't watch Formula One unless like they only enjoy it if there's like some good safety car periods and it gets a bit mixed up. And the only other race I've watched with them this year is Baku. So
Okay.
every couple of months, I'm just going to go over there and we're going to have an absolute banger of a race.
Yeah, you just got to get them to watch a few more, I reckon. See what
Yeah.
happens. So after the crash, we'd had those five drivers out by this point. The race got red flagged. Everyone went back into the pits, and by this point, you're thinking Williams points. Well, that's the first thing I was thinking.
You are, because Latifi got up to like sixth, I think, didn't he, at the end of the melee?
I think he was like fourth or something.
So, well, you carry on and I'll have a look. I'll double check.
Okay. So all the cars went into the pits. Session got red flagged. We had like half an hour or so of waiting around. and then we got underway again. Everyone, so while Giovinazzi had changed onto slicks before the start of the race, everyone went out again on intermediates. But am I right that they could have put on whatever tyres they'd wanted at that point?
Yes, because it's basically, it's classed as a pit stop.
Mm-hmm.
So they can do any work to the car that they want to. They could change the rear wing if they had time.
So there'd been like a fair few repair jobs, and then everyone went out on intermediate tyres, did the parade lap, had to then line up on the grid again for the restart, but everyone except Lewis Hamilton went into the pits to change onto slicks, which meant we had this very surreal image of Lewis Hamilton on pole position, the medical car behind him, and Crofty shouting, "Lights out, away we go," and then Lewis Hamilton just setting off. And it was very bizarre, and I feel like it was some kind of metaphor for the last 5 years.
I absolutely could not stop laughing my head off because it was just so funny, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And also, like we said about Bottas, it had to be Hamilton, at the front of the grid with no one else. Like, if it was, I don't know, Latifi, it would not have been half as funny, but because it's Lewis Hamilton, it was just hysterical.
But, imagine if Giovinazzi had stayed on his slicks and then he'd been the only one to start the race.
Yeah.
He'd have led at least one lap. And also, if that had been the case, would he have had to line up on, the 10th spot?
Yeah.
Or would he have been able to go to the front?
No, because they put little light panels where their marker is. He's still starting from that position. But it doesn't really matter because they've got to wait a certain amount of time after he passes the pit lane to let everyone through. I mean, that would have been the funniest thing as well. What would have happened if Lewis Hamilton had have pitted with everyone else? Did the directors of F1 do the whole countdown sequence? Does Crofty say lights out and away we go?
And there's just no one there.
Just the medical car.
I would have loved to see that, but I still don't think it would have been quite as funny as just Lewis Hamilton there by himself.
No, not at all. And I quite like it because was it the 2003 or 2005 US Grand Prix where they only had 6 runners, and that was funny, but also it was really disappointing. But it's a funny image. This is just
it's just funny.
Yeah, it's one of the best sporting images of the season. Yeah.
And I like that with the commentary, you got sort of 2 excited moments from Crofty because you got his lights out where we go for Lewis. Lewis went past the pit exit, and then he was like, "And here comes everyone else!"
You should have, I'll try and send you Alex Jakes' commentary because he's like, it's lights out, he's lights out for Lewis Hamilton only, or something. And then he's like, "This is the most extraordinary start, and George Russell's in P2.
Yeah, that is the next point I've got for us to come on to is George Russell. How far did your heart sink when you saw him go from 2nd to 7th?
I had a feeling, I was 80% I thought his car had broken, and 20% thought that he'd done something naughty, which he evidently did.
Yeah. So he jumped to basically the front of the pit exit after he changed his tyres. So then he was in the front for the restart, and he kind of passed 6 people or something. But if you watch his drive out of the pit, there's nowhere for him to go.
No, so this is the thing. I do think that Latifi was further down the order when they went into the pits. But so I think he was behind the likes of Ferrari, Carlos Sainz.
Okay.
But because their pit box is at the end, when he goes into the box, it's less likely that he's got to wait for another car to go past. Whereas if you're Lewis Hamilton and you come into the pit box first, you're not going to get released safely if you've got the other 10 cars coming down. So you're actually more likely to lose a load of positions, whereas Williams are likely to pick up a load of positions.
Because they're getting past everyone. That's true.
Well, and they haven't got to wait for anyone to come in front of them. So for Russell, he could have been patient and just like when you get to a junction, just stick his nose in and pick up a load of positions in the queue.
But, I mean, like, because obviously Latifi boxed first, changed his tyres, got out, and then George came in. But should he have just waited in the box? Because like
No,
by this point, the pit lane was full of cars. So where should he have gone?
There are 2 lanes in the pit lane, aren't there?
Okay.
I think there's enough room for 2 cars, just. So what he could have done is just waited at like an angle to get into the queue, and then as soon as the space came, just beat the other car to it and get in front. But I have to say, what he did, I thought was genius. So what he did is, did you watch any of practice?
No, I didn't watch any practice this time.
At the end of the pit lane, there are essentially 2 lanes. The left-hand lane is just the lane for going straight through, or there's a space on the right-hand side of the pit exit where you do practice starts.
Okay.
And so you wait for everyone to pass, and if you can then do a practice start and get out, you get out. And that's all he did. He basically did a practice start and got past Ocon. I think it's genius. I think he should have stayed where he was and appealed it. I know it's not worth the risk. It's not worth the risk for Williams.
It would have been horrible.
Yeah, but would basically just like copy and paste our podcast from last week on Lucas Di Grassi at the Formula E, and
that's true. We did want pit lane madness,
and we got it.
I know. I'm going to come on to another bit of pit lane madness, which was where we lost our 6th driver.
Yep.
Which was when Alfa Romeo's Kimi Raikkonen had an unsafe release, crashed into the front of... Yeah, the back of Kimi crashed into the front of Nikita Mazepin, broke his suspension there and then.
Completely not Mazepin's fault, completely not Kimi's fault either. But that's... this is the drama that I was just kind of talking about with Williams. Williams don't have any of that, apart from Haas behind them. Because if Nikita came in, Mick wasn't out of the box when Nikita came in.
Yeah.
So if Nikita had been like 2 seconds early, Kimi would have lost a load of positions because he can't get out because Mazepin's there. Yeah. All this drama and the race hadn't even started for the second time.
I know. Yeah, it's mad. I did think it was a bit of a shame for Mazepin because he obviously hadn't really done anything wrong. And like, as we saw with Mick later in the race, it was like the only chance that team's going to get to race against other people.
Yeah.
So while I don't really like Nikita Mazepin, he could have done with that experience of racing some other people.
Yeah.
And then with the team so strapped for cash, like Gunther Steiner said over the weekend, something about they're really struggling with all the crashes that both drivers are having. And this was just another one that wasn't remotely their fault, and now they've got to pick up the bill.
Well, that's a whole other topic, isn't it? It's what Red Bull have been talking about at the moment after the past 2 races. Like, if you're part of a crash where another driver gets a penalty, it's not really fair that you pay the price for it.
Yeah, Ferrari have said the same because Charles is going to need a new engine after his crash with Stroll.
Yeah.
So is there a way to get the other teams in a budget cap era? Is there a way to get the other teams to foot the bill? But I do.
But even for that, like, it's not fair if you put a brand new engine in your car and because of a crash someone else gets a penalty for, you have to get a penalty later in the year because you've used too many engines.
Yeah, I can appreciate that doesn't seem fair. I don't think getting other people to pay for the repairs is like any reasonable way to solve this. Because there's always going to be ways for engineers and, I don't know, I guess accountants maybe, to find loopholes and be like, oh yeah, we broke this piece too.
Yeah.
And then you'll get teams like if a Haas crashes into a. This is a point that I'm actually stealing from someone else. There's a Twitter Spaces thing called Racing Spaces where they talk about motorsport, and they were talking about this last night, and they said that the difference with Formula One, why this would never work, is that if a Haas crashes into a Mercedes and breaks like a steering column or something, a Mercedes steering column is probably a lot more expensive than a Haas steering column.
That's a good point.
So Haas are then having to pay for something that they wouldn't normally afford.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite an interesting consideration that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah,
you kind of assume that everyone spends the same amount on parts, but they really don't because everyone's got such varying budgets.
Maybe if there's like an insurance scheme or something where all the teams pay X amount and you get a payout if you break X component, and then it's not going to cover the whole cost, but at least it helps somewhat.
Yeah. But then as teams are becoming more budget conscious, do you think, how much do you have to budget for crashes? Do you have to assess your drivers on whether or not they're likely to crash?
Yeah.
On how you pick them.
Maybe there's got to be some leniency in the rules for that then.
Yeah.
I know you say you can maybe fiddle it a little bit so that if you want to get some new parts, you can essentially commit insurance fraud is what we're saying. But the FIA have ways to scrutinise it, don't they, and keep the cars in parc fermé conditions and stuff. So I'm sure they can find a way around this.
Yeah, exactly.
So Nicholas Latifi did push his way up into third once Hamilton came off and he pitted, didn't he?
Yeah, it dropped right down to the bottom.
Which he was surprised he was last. I don't really understand. I don't understand how he was surprised by that.
Yeah, everyone. Unless I guess maybe he didn't know everyone else had stopped already. But surely he'd have seen no one in his mirrors when he was on the grid by himself.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think he did. It looked like he was, when he started, was weaving to warm his tyres up. But it also looked like he was kind of moving over to defend from anyone that might have been there. There was a car in his blind spot or something.
Maybe it's just force of habit. And he's like, I've got to defend. Oh, wait.
Veer into Max. Just veer into Max. So he saw sense. He must have thought that he couldn't communicate with his team on that in-lap. The out-lap before the start, didn't he? So after the race started, they said, come in and get some new tyres like everyone else did, please.
Yeah, but that's the rule. They're not allowed to say it. The drivers can say, I'm coming in, but they can't say, should I come in?
That is the rule on the formation lap. But after the red flag, it wasn't the formation lap, it was lap 4.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah. So
that rule doesn't stand anymore.
There was someone on Reddit did a load of the communications, who got told to come in, who didn't. And it looked like a lot of the teams told them to box, but some of them just didn't say anything because they thought the rule should apply.
It still wasn't allowed.
It's technically a racing lap.
I see. So that move did really work out well for people like Nicholas Latifi, like you mentioned. And it was at this point that we got George's first heartbreaking radio message of the race, when he came over and was like, prioritise Nicky's race, make me box early, compromise mine, just prioritise Nicky. And I was like, George!
That's brilliant. I don't think that was heartbreaking. I thought that was valiant.
No, it was. But then in the back of my mind, I was like, after all this, George isn't going to get points.
Yeah, that'd have been gutting. But to be honest, if they did, they did prioritise him, Latifi might have dropped out of the points if they hadn't have done that, because he got very close to George at the end of the race, didn't he?
Yeah, he was only sort of a second or two ahead, I think, by the end. Because he started off making his Williams very wide and holding on to the position for quite a few laps, but then he did slowly start to lose out to people like Sainz, Gasly, and Tsunoda, I think it was, that made it past him.
But the real benefit to him doing that for the course of the race was that there was like a second gap. I think Tsunoda was behind him at one point. So, he pulled off a second of Tsunoda. Tsunoda was getting in the DRS, fine. But Vettel and Ocon were just flying off in the distance. And Latifi was essentially creating this buffer between those two and the rest of the pack. And had that not have happened, I think Hamilton would have caught them.
Yeah. I was quite shocked to see that as well, because we're so used to seeing Max and Lewis fly off ahead and have like a 15-second gap to whoever's behind them. But I always assumed that was like just because they were so much faster. But it kind of all depends on the race pace, and even like two cars that are considerably slower than like respectively slower, I guess.
Yeah.
Even they can still do it, and you still end up with this kind of split pack where you've got the front runners and then everyone else. So in such a mad race, I wasn't expecting to see that to the same extent.
Did you honestly, when was the point where you genuinely believed Ocon and Vettel were going to win? Because we've had so many crazy races like this that sometimes I was watching it thinking, I think they're just fighting for third. Like at the end of all this, the order of the world is going to prevail, and Lewis Hamilton is going to win this race, and somehow Max Verstappen is going to come second.
You still thought Verstappen was going to make it up?
No, not necessarily, but like, it's the way that like these seasons go sometimes, these races where you have certain cars that are so much faster. Obviously, Verstappen has so much damage. But I thought it was maybe more likely that like the Ferrari was going to get them than the slower Alpine and Aston Martin.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that Carlos didn't end up higher up than he did. I thought he was going to fight his way onto the podium, but he was there calling out the strategy, saying, we're going to get passed by Lewis later on, he's going to pit again, which I was quite surprised by.
I'm not,
why?
Because what do they do at Ferrari?
I don't know.
Charles does this he did it last year, didn't he? And then he had his like strategy struggles with Vettel the year before, where they didn't know what they were doing. It just annoys me so much.
I don't understand why every other team can be so on it with strategy and figure out ways to make it work. Like Mercedes switched to doing the two-stop, and that's what meant Lewis made it past Max and Ricciardo because he undercut them. So why aren't Ferrari making these kind of calls and doing tactical stops? Why are they just being like, we'll make one stop in every race. That is our strategy.
Especially because they're in such a big battle with McLaren at the moment that they need... It looks like some races they can't do it on pace. So they need to pull out some tricks.
Yeah, I think so. But to answer your question, when did I think they could win? I think it was the point Lewis went in the stop, one of his second stops, I think it was. I was like, he's going to drop quite far back. He's going to be quicker, but I think one of them might still win it.
Yeah.
I did kind of think Lewis would come second, though.
Which he did.
Well...
Yeah, I know. And I think...
as far as my notes for this episode go, he did not.
one more lap, and he would have, because he was so much faster. At one point, he was like 4 seconds a lap faster than Ocon.
Yeah, like when he changed...
Crazy numbers.
When he changed onto his new set of mediums, I think it was. Like the lap before had been the quickest, and it was like a 1:20. And then the next one was like a 1:18.
Yeah.
And I think it's the first time I've like seen the tyre difference so clearly.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. But because Lewis was so far back, it meant we got to see him racing through the pack. And he charged his way through, but then hit the blockade that was two-time world champion Fernando Alonso. What did you think to that?
Pleasantly surprised. it was epic racing. Very impressed that in a slower car with worse tyres, it just shows that Alonso still got it. We've not really seen that this season, but he's still got it. And B, how much having the right driver in the car really does matter. It's not just about what the car is.
Yeah, because the way Alonso was able to like tweak his lines on the second and third corners, I think it was where most of the moves that Lewis were making were. He could like just go a little bit wider and still come out up front, a little bit sharper and still be out. Could take the outside line, the inside line. He was able to block wherever he needed to be. It seemed like every lap they came round, the two of them did a different line through those corners, just because they were trying to find a little chink that they could exploit. But it was some of the best racing I've seen in ages.
It was some of the best racing since lap 14 when Mick Schumacher and Max Verstappen were going wheel to wheel.
Yeah, that was good. Although I don't think either of them, Lewis and Alonso, I don't think they like touched wheels at any point, did they?
No.
Whereas Mick and Max had a little
shunt.
Little scuffle.
But yeah, thoroughly impressed with Alonso. And I mean, the win is his as much as it is Ocon's, because it would not have happened if he hadn't have done that.
Yeah, he held Lewis up for so long.
I think Ocon touched on this a lot, and he said, I heard a lot of things about Fernando Alonso as a teammate. And I think Alonso's time in Formula One after he was a world champion was not very good with his first stint at McLaren with Lewis Hamilton. He was not a good team player. And then Ferrari was fine. But then he was very kind of drab with McLaren and didn't get a very good reputation. He's a very negative person at that team. But he's come back with like a new perspective on life, it seems.
Yeah, I did also kind of wonder if, because when he went back to McLaren, they were a team in decline. Whereas since Renault came back, they're now Alpine, they have been getting steadily better each year.
Yeah.
So I wonder if some of it's to do with like the environment he's in, and he just knows that the car will eventually have more capability. But yeah, it was 100% a team victory, and like the way the two of them at the end having a big hug and Alonso was picking Ocon up, that was really nice to see. And like, he has been getting better every race.
Yeah.
So who knows what he can do after the summer break.
I mean, those are scenes that like we haven't seen in Formula One in a long time. Like two teammates genuinely happy with each other.
Yeah.
Like we might have had a glimpse of it if Sainz and Lando ever got on a podium together. That's never going to happen now. Like they've done that and it wasn't as happy as maybe it could have been.
Yeah.
But it was just wholesome. We don't get many wholesome moments in Formula One like that.
No. It was... Yeah. Wholesome is definitely the way to describe it. I would agree.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope I got my sentence for later.
So while Lewis was being held up by Alonso to protect Ocon's lead, Ocon himself was having to do some pretty impressive defending from 5-time world champion? 3? 4. Oh.
10 to 13.
Some amount between 1 and 10. Ocon himself was having to do quite a lot of defending from 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel. And I thought their race, while it wasn't quite as close as Fernando and Lewis were, Ocon was being a very consistent, confident defender. Kind of always knew where to have his car. And when there was that little wobble where he got held up behind, I think it was Kimi Räikkönen in the Alpha.
Yep.
He still put his car exactly where it needed to be, held on to the lead, walked off with the win.
Shame for Aston Martin, because I think they probably did have the faster car.
Mm.
And at the end of the day, like looking back with hindsight, following Ocon for so long is probably what the problem has been with their fuel.
Mm.
Being at the front and being able to have it's cleaner air. So Ocon is going faster than he would be if they were in the middle of the pack. Therefore, Vettel's going faster than he might have been if he was lapping in the middle of the pack. But he's stuck behind Ocon the entire time, using more fuel to kind of keep in that window.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably where they had that miscalculation.
Yeah, that is a good point, because when Seb did cross the line in second, he was obviously very annoyed to not have taken the win, but he was ordered pretty much straight away to pull his car over so that he had enough fuel in, and the stewards have said there's only 300 mils instead of a litre, whereas the team are saying there's still 1.5 litres in it.
So, yeah. Have you heard the latest line on this?
No. The last I heard was just that the car was being impounded and that they would check it when they checked it.
So they are saying that the reason they pulled the car over was because there was a fuel pump issue. So it's not that there wasn't... They think there's, like you said, 1.5 litres of fuel left in the car, just not in the fuel tank that the FIA take the fuel from.
Mm-hmm.
So their appeal is based on that 300 millilitres of fuel being legal, first of all, and them being able to prove, which what Verstappen now says they're able to do, that there is 1.5 litres in the car, just not in the fuel tank.
So it's like in the pipes somewhere?
Yeah, because basically it wasn't pulling through in the right way. I don't know how to... I'm not... As you may have noticed from 21 episodes of this podcast, I'm not the most technically gifted F1 fan. But yeah, that's the latest line, and I imagine it's going to take 3 weeks to resolve because everyone's going away on holiday.
Yeah. When we were first talking about it, and I was like, oh, they say there's fuel in the tank left. I was like, in my head, I was like, does that mean they're just going to blow into the pipe and try and blow all the fuel out? Is that going to be how this is resolved?
Yeah.
But, don't know.
No, I think it will literally be a matter of taking the car apart and trying to rinse everything out of it.
Yeah, I think so. But until then, Seb is still second place on the official results on the Formula One website. I know there's been a bit of confusion when originally it said he was disqualified and then he was back in second. But for the sake of this podcast, Seb is still in second. Which meant that Lewis came home third, and the rest of the top 10 was Sainz, Alonso, Gasly, Tsunoda, Nicholas Latifi, George Russell, Max Verstappen, Kimi Räikkönen.
Incredible. So that was our attempt at breaking down the Hungarian Grand Prix and untangling the mess that was in our minds after it had been melted by Formula One. Thank you for listening. If you would like more of this chat, including our one-sentence reviews, you can listen to the fuller version of this episode on Spotify or Acast or Google Podcasts or Apple Podcasts or any of the things that are at the bottom of the screen right now. You can also keep up to date with us on Twitter at Friday Formula. The handle is also on the screen, or our handles are on the screen. I'm at Will Longman, and Owen is
at Owen_Bellwood.
Going into some break, why don't you join our fantasy league? We have more than 3 of us now. I think I actually made up some places this week, even though I think it's safe to say everybody, unless you had Esteban Ocon on your team, had a shocking week. But join us for the second half of the season. We're taking a little summer break of our own, so we won't be back next week. Try not to be too upset about it. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks for watching. I might do